I have to show it to you because it's absolutely insane. But it shows you how America really works. I'm done with Trump. Fuck Trump. His speech is boring.
All right, so this is probably going to be the single least surprising story that I've covered all week because we have yet another massive increase to the Pentagon budget here in the United States. And of course, it is being done along bipartisan lines. You know, we always got
senators to tack $45 billion onto Biden's defense budget. Now, if you want to understand how much money that is, there was a provision in Build Back Better to pay for free community college. Free community college. That costs $10 billion a year. Bernie Sanders' free public college for all plan costs around $45 billion. Free college is around $45 billion.
I love that precious bipartisanship, specifically when it comes to serving the military-industrial complex, as is very obviously the case in this story. So here from Politico, they say senators tack $45 billion onto Biden's defense budget, okay, which was already a record Pentagon budget from the year before. So let's just go ahead and read into some of the details here. They say the Senate Armed Services Committee has endorsed a $45 billion increase to President Joe Biden's military spending plans in its annual defense policy bill, blowing past the administration.
Here it is. In case you think I'm making it up. Bernie Sanders' newest College for All Act briefly explained. Here's how Sanders' College for Act would work. Federal government would give states and tribes $48 billion per year through a 2-to-1 federal dollar match program. If states commit to eliminating tuitions and fees at public universities and colleges. It can't go to administrator salaries, any merit-based financial aid, or non-academic buildings like shiny new football stadiums. HBCUs and minority-serving institutions would also qualify for this federal funding. Roughly 200 institutions would be eligible. Proposal also caps student loan interest rates the same rate that the federal government pays for its debt. So in other words, he would have been able to provide free college at all public universities and historically black colleges for $48 billion a year. They're increasing military spending by $45 billion, and they pretend like free college is pie in the sky. This is an increase. Look at this.
Pentagon budget for a second straight year. And they say the rebuke of Biden's budget plans, which occurred during the panel's closed-door markup of the National Defense Authorization Act this week, comes after lawmakers added roughly $30 billion to the White House's previous defense spending proposal. So even though we just pulled out of Afghanistan and did a nearly 2 decades long war, somehow we need even more money than the years prior to this. And
I mean, I gotta look up this article. This is incredible. And nobody's mad about this. Nobody's mad about this. Nobody's mad about this. I just gotta find this. I can't even find this fucking article. Which one? This is the last boost. This is the last boost. Thank you, Eeyore. Senators tack $45 billion under Biden's defense budget. $45 billion. They're gonna spend $847 billion under a Democrat. Chat. Do you know what Donald Trump's last defense budget was? Do you know what Donald Trump's last defense budget number was? I want you to guess. I want you to guess. The answer is $738 billion. $738 billion. Build Back Better was $175 billion. We're now at $847 billion for the military. We couldn't afford $175 billion for Build Back Better, but we can't afford $847 billion, an increase of $109 billion over Trump's budget? This is absolutely insane. We should be cutting the defense budget to reduce inflation. We're not at war. We should be cutting the defense budget to lower demand. This will worsen inflation. The Build Back Better bill is $175 billion a year. That's it. Not even a quarter of this. And we're talking, I mean, Bernie Sanders' mega fucking plan when he first started negotiations was $650 billion a year. Even the Bernie Sanders most generous pie in the sky fucking shit wasn't even close to this amount of money. We can't even pull together and spend a quarter of the money on our own country. I mean, this is the Democrats are in control. This is not the Republicans. This is the Democrats. I mean, the Pentagon budget when Trump came into office was $600 billion. I mean, it's the amount of it. This is insanity. Mike, don't you think there's a reason they need 40 billion more? They probably know something we don't. Is this scale every year? This is every year. We're spending 847 billion per year. Or put another way, 8.47 trillion over 10 years.
Thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's a great honor to be included in the conversation. Right now at Biden's Summit of the Americas, the United States is posing as the arbiter of human rights and democracy. It's granting itself basically the right to dictate the future of Latin America. And we know that several countries are excluded from the summit for the crime of charting their own paths, their own future, not being subservient to the empire. And all that this summit really is for Biden to project imperial dominance over a region that he calls his front yard. A recent costs of war study reveals that U.S. counterterrorism operations have been active in 83 countries in the last 3 years. In Latin America alone, there have been about 60 U.S. military interventions since 1890. The United States perpetuates this daily violence and subjugation, not to spread democracy or human rights, but to extract resources and protect capital. This global empire does not only use brute military force to impose capitalism's world order. It's learned from past blunders of obvious coups and regime change wars that have come to define its naked imperialism. During the Cold War, they were pretty open about this, right? They were open about the threat of communism posed.
Spider Mike, thanks for the 10 gifties.
Today, the premise of the empire remains the same, but it speaks in a much different language, a language of humanitarian intervention and basically doublespeak, right, of humanitarianism, liberal interventionism, and so on. It cloaks its goals and control through hybrid war, methods of mass propaganda, and economic warfare through the use of sanctions, which they call soft power. Sanctions are administered with the pretense of peaceful coercion to bypass war, but the reality is that sanctions are war, and they cause the same amount of mass suffering and death, just with plausible deniability. Of course, sanctions are nothing new. We all know the horrific devastation wrought by sanctions during the Gulf War in the 90s. That killed 500,000 children. But in a post-9/11 world, the US system of financial weaponry has grown with extreme precision. The Patriot Act gave the Treasury power to sever ties between US economic infrastructure, which most of the world relies on, and entire national jurisdictions. This causes a profound chilling effect for all global institutions who opt to cut off entire countries rather than risk penalties. These sweeping powers are unconstrained and largely undefined, and have the power to decimate economies and leave countries in financial ruin. From 2000 to 2021, the use of sanctions increased nearly 1,000%. Leaders from both parties use them now as the primary method to force countries to fall in line. Trump dramatically increased sanctions on every targeted country, and Biden has pretty much maintained all of them. According to Biden's Treasury Department, they are the foreign policy tool of first resort. And today, US sanctions affect a third of humanity, with more than 8,000 measures on 42 different countries. Presidents no longer have to deal with pressuring Congress into voting for war. No, not because they would face any real opposition for doing so, but because they can cause debilitating harm against their so-called adversaries with barely any oversight or media coverage. When Venezuela's economic freefall, Cuba's food shortages, or Afghanistan's severe famine are even covered by the corporate media, the utterance of sanctions is almost always omitted in the context of why these things are happening. It's always just in a vacuum, right? It's always on the shoulders of those governments. At Biden's summit down the street, they're going to tell you that these sanctions are good and they're necessary in the interests of human rights and democracy. They're going to say that they're justified because they only target despotic leaders whose values don't represent ours. That's the first big lie. Obviously. Anyone can look at who the US supports around the world and see that its closest allies are theocratic dictatorships like like Saudi Arabia, of course, military dictatorships like Israel, or flagrant human rights abusers like Colombia or Uganda. Not only do these countries not get sanctioned, but they all receive massive financial assistance, military aid, training. All of these countries serve as linchpins for the empire in their respective continents. And nothing they can do, including the mass killing of peaceful protesters or the state-sanctioned execution of American journalists, will warrant the United States to break these bonds. The second big lie is that the United States has the ordained right to decide which countries should be subjected to punishment, what leaders a country deserves, and the process in which they can choose these leaders. If people elect a leader that they do not like for something as simple as wanting to take out IMF loans, not wanting to take out IMF loans, or for wanting to use their own resources for their own people, the United States will use its massive amount of leverage as a superpower to dole out extreme punishment. You must accept your role as a colonial imperial outpost, or you will face consequences. This is gangsterism. The third and most insidious lie is that Biden's summit is telling right now is that sanctions only impact the powerful, the elite, and their corrupt inner circles. With the help of corporate media, this lie has been facilitated very well. And in fact, a lot of well-intentioned liberals also believe this to be true. They think, well, we have to do something, right? We have to punish these elites in power who abuse their people. But literally anywhere you look where sanctions are deployed, the opposite is true. Sanctions are specifically designed to target the most defenseless and vulnerable people, the young, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled. They cause massive food shortages. They force people to ration basic goods they need to survive. They directly target the public infrastructure of those countries, and they sadistically deny healthcare and life-saving medication for people who need it. In Venezuela, we know that in just 2 years, sanctions were responsible for the deaths of 40,000 people. And I know that we've heard the statistic, but before moving on, I just really want you to sit there and wrap your mind around it, because it's really horrific, right? 40,000 lives extinguished. 40,000 people whose families are shattered. 40,000 people. It's a statistic that we just say, right? But we can't even comprehend how many people that is. And that's just a drop in the bucket for the empire. Again, plausible deniability. In Cuba, the blockade has continued to tighten more and more to the point that life-saving vaccines could not be administered because they could not import things like syringes. During the height of the pandemic, government officials had to make the choice, the heart-wrenching choice, to give COVID patients oxygen or babies formula. Imagine making that choice. Do you give someone oxygen to survive, or do you give a helpless infant what they need to have a chance at life? That's the choices that Cuban officials are making daily because of the barbarism from this government and the economic blockade that continues. This is nothing short of economic terrorism that deprives tens of millions of people the human right to live freely. It is collective punishment, and it is a crime against humanity. The purpose of sanctions is not to pressure leaders to adopt human rights. It's to make these populations in these countries feel so much pain and suffering.
Well, the good thing is, and this is what I will remind you, is that that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are going to suffer. They're going to lose because they're sanctioning Venezuela, because they're sanctioning Iran. This country doesn't have enough cheap energy. Prices are spiking, and they're going to be thrown out of office. So there's at least that small amount of justice that's coming Joe Biden's way. You know, all these people are going to go down in history as mega failures who are super unpopular. And it's because of their decision to serve the interests of global capital over the interests of the Venezuelan people or their own people. So you have that bit of solace that Joe Biden will go down as a record-shattering failure of a president and will be cursed and spit upon in history.
That they feel that the only way they can improve their lives is if they overthrow their government and somehow install a pro-US government that will alleviate their suffering, right, and leave them be. That's their objective strategy. That is literally what they think sanctions will do. But what really happens, right? What really happens when the US succeeds in getting what they want, as they have dozens of times in Latin America alone? They send in henchmen, at the IMF and the World Bank to force reliance on the US dollar, to make these countries take out massive loans with strict conditions to prevent them from developing on their own. For example, we know one of the reasons for the US-backed coup in Haiti is because they were thinking of raising the minimum wage. And of course, multinational corporations could not have that, right?
Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation lobbied extensively against Haiti raising their minimum wage.
They wanted Haiti to basically maintain as a sweatshop for multinational corporations. So they decided to back a brutal coup for the crime of wanting to give their people a better life.
I wonder how you justify the invitation of Dr. Ariel Henry from Haiti when he is actually governing with no constitutional mandate. His government has been implicated in many different crimes, including potentially the murder of the past president. Countries like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua are being excluded from the Summit of the Americas because you deem them to not be democratic. But how can you use that as your justification when you have the so-called Prime Minister of Haiti who is ruling under no sort of democratic mandate here?
Yeah, we, like many other countries, are determined to get to the facts of what happened in Haiti, including the assassination of the previous prime minister. We're determined to find the facts wherever they lead and to whomever they lead.
Well, but does democracy only matter if they disagree with the United States government? What is your actual basis for saying a government is undemocratic and another one can't be invited and another one that's undemocratic can be invited?
The countries that bow to the dictates of the United States remain in a state of utter destitution. U.S. control does not mean an improvement in your daily lives or the quality of life. It just means military bases will be in your country that destroy your land. It means that the natural resources are stripped and stolen. It means that your sovereignty has been robbed. As Michael Parenti once said, there are no poor countries. You don't go to poor countries to make money. These countries are rich. Only the people are poor. These countries are not underdeveloped. They are overexploited by the capitalists who steal trillions of their wealth. These billionaires are sick sociopaths. We all heard Elon Musk proudly boast, "We will coup whoever we want." They are shameless. And the whole purpose of Biden's summit down the street is to say that all these problems that face Latin America could be solved by the United States, our leadership and guidance of this great country. But what everyone in this room knows already, and what I've seen firsthand in Cuba and Venezuela and so many other places, is that it's not the politicians from the imperial core that have the answers. It's the poor and working people who have the answers. They know how to use their resources for their own people and for their own good.
And here you go, chat. I found this. Let them live on $3 a day. The U.S. Embassy aided Levi's Hanes contractors in their fight against an increase in Haiti's minimum wage. Contractors for Fruit of the Loom, Hanes, and Levi's worked in close concert with the U.S. Embassy when they aggressively moved to block a minimum wage increase for Haitian Assembly Zone workers, the lowest paid in the hemisphere, according to secret State Department cables. The factory owners told the Haitian parliament that they were willing to give workers a 9 cents an hour per pay increase to 31 cents per hour to make t-shirts, bras, and underwear for U.S. clothing giants like Dockers and Nautica. But the factory owners refused to pay 62 cents an hour or $5 per day, as a measure unanimously passed by the Haitian parliament in June 2009 would have mandated. And they had the vigorous backing of the U.S. Agency for International Development and the U.S. Embassy when they took that stand. To resolve the impasse between the factory owners and parliament, the State Department urged quick intervention by then Haitian President Rene Préval, who was the fucking Secretary of State at this time, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama was the president. The first black president had his State Department intervene over a Haitian Assembly's unanimous decision for a $5 a day wage. That's your Democratic Party. I'm sorry, but that's the fucking reality, bro. They're scum. Barack Obama is scum.
Even under the most horrific and repressive conditions that this government imposes on so many tens of millions of people around the world, the people will always find a way to survive. And the harsher conditions become, the more class consciousness grows, one rooted in international solidarity, one that links the struggles we all face to capitalism, Militarism, imperialism, that's the real threat. Taking the power back and telling the Pentagon that no, you will not be the ones that dictate our future. We will decide our own future, and we will fight for our lives to do so. Thank you.
I think this is one of the things that people have a hard time wrapping their minds around, is that, and then people have the balls to use Venezuela as an argument against providing resources for our own people. Oh, Mike, if we, instead of spending $850 billion on the military, we spent $40 billion on free college, well, then that's Venezuela, Venezuela, Venezuela. Why is Venezuela having economic problems? Oh, are we sanctioning them and cutting them off from the global fucking market? Are we sending coups? Are we recognizing non-elected people as the president? Are we attempting to assassinate their presidents? That's fucking reality, man. It's fucking disgusting. All right, I'm sorry if you're pissed off. I didn't mean to. And this is the link, by the way, chat. I'm gonna put it in there. And if you want to watch Abby's speech, that's the reality, man. For the 20-month period between early February 2008 and October 2009, U.S. Embassy officials closely monitored reported on the minimum wage issue. Cables show that the embassy fully understand the popularity of the measure. Cables attest that the new wage even had the support from a majority of Haitian private sector representative, based on reports that wages in the Dominican Republic and Nicaragua will increase also. Still, the proposal engendered fierce opposition from Haiti's tiny assembly zone elite, which Washington had long been supporting with direct financial aid and free trade deals. In other words, we literally gave money to enslave the Haitian people. The U.S. Congress passed the Haitian Hemispheric Opportunity through Partnership Encouragement Bill, which gave Haitian assembly zone manufacturers preferential trade incentives. U.S. NBC cables claim that those efforts were imperiled by the parliamentary demands for a wage hike to keep pace with soaring inflation and high food prices. Textile industry representatives, led by the Association of Haitian Industry, objected to the immediate per-day wage increase in the assembly sector, saying it would devastate the industry and negatively impact the benefits of the Haitian Hemispheric through Opportunity Partnership Encouragement Act. Yeah, where else are you going to go to get $3 a day wages? U.S. Assembly monitored widespread pro-minimum wage demonstrations and openly worried about the political impact of the minimum wage battle. Hey, chat, NATO is for the left, though. U.S. Embassy is basically a union-busting spy agency in every country it's in. But no, NATO is good for the left, though, as they're trying to suppress Haitian attempts to raise the wage in their devastated country. UN troops were called in to quell student protests, sparking further demands from Haitians for the end of the 9,000-strong UN occupation. As Haitian Platform of Development Alternatives put in a press release in June 2009, every time the minimum wage has been discussed, ADIH has cried wolf to scare the government against its passage, that raising minimum wage would mean the certain and immediate closure of industry in Haiti and the cause of sudden loss of jobs. In every case, it was a lie. That's fucking Barack Obama's presidency, by the way. That's what a real real leftist will teach you shit that'll piss you off. That's true. And why Bernie Sanders is not kind of close with Biden. They're decades apart. Yeah. Anyway, well, chat, I went a little bit long today. Hope you enjoyed the stream. If you want more content, please go follow all the links and subscribe to Jacobin Magazine using coupon code Central Committee. All the Discord, all the links are in the chat right now. Make sure you hit the follow button. Sorry for the downer to end the stream, but you should know this so you can fight it. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.